This tutorial is for both the PC and Shack versions of Pavlov. Please watch the full video and read the pinned comment before giving this a go yourself. To rig a model for a custom gun, you will need to use 3D editing software. In this tutorial, I will be using Blender 3.6, however any newer version of Blender will work. Before we can start rigging, we will need an example mesh to use as a guide for scale and rotation. Inside the mod kit, go to Plugins, Custom Map Tools Content, Pav Examples, Guns, M4, then right-click SK_M4V2 and select Export. You can name this whatever you want. For convenience, I'd suggest exporting it to the Downloads folder. Open up Blender and create a new project, then delete the 3 objects already in the scene. Go to File, Import, FBX, then select the M4 mesh you just exported. Click on the mesh in Scene Collection and click Delete, then click on it again and click Delete a second time. After that, you will want to set its rotation to 0 on all axes. Now that you've set up your reference mesh, you can import the mesh you intend to use with your custom gun. For this tutorial, I will be using a low poly AK model I found on Fab. It will be linked in the pinned comment. Make sure the scale and orientation of your mesh matches the example mesh, then try to align them. The mesh I'm using is already the correct scale and orientation. Once you have your mesh aligned, you can hide the example mesh. Do not forget to frequently save your project. The final product will be a single rigged mesh rather than many separate meshes rigged to one skeleton. We can achieve this by using vertex groups. This process involves assigning each face to a group and naming the corresponding bones the same as those groups. Personally, I find it easier to separate each component that will have a separate bone and assign their vertex groups individually than merging them again before binding the skeleton. In the top left, switch to Edit mode, then change the selection mode to Faces. You can click the background to deselect all, or press A to select all. Hover over a face and press L to select an entire area. Depending on how your mesh is set up, this may not be possible. If it is not, then you'll have to select the faces manually. First, I'm going to select the entirety of the charging handle. Once the whole charging handle is selected, hover over Mesh at the top of your screen, then go to Separate and select Selection. I am now going to repeat this process for every single moving part, including other bits such as magazines, bullets, and shells. The main parts I've separated are the charging handle and the trigger. I have not separated the selector switch, as the mesh I'm using isn't actually set up for that. Feel free to add one to your mesh. If your magazine doesn't have an empty variant, you can just select and separate the magazine part from the bullets. Duplicate that, then remerge the original magazine. Or if it's only empty, fill it with bullet meshes and merge. The magazine, bullets, and shells are no longer relevant to rigging the gun, so I'll be hiding them for the rest of the video. Just make sure they are centered before exporting them. With the mesh separated, we're ready to set up the vertex groups. Select the main body of the gun and go into Edit mode. Then in the bottom right window, go to Data and find Vertex Groups and press the plus symbol. Double-click this newly created vertex group and rename it to Body. Then press A to select the whole mesh and press Assign. Then you want to repeat this process for the other components and name their vertex groups accordingly. With the vertex group set up, manually select each component but select the main body last. Then press Ctrl J to merge. You will see this has also merged all the vertex groups for each component. Once you've set up your model, there are two main methods I use for rigging. I will be showing both in this video. The first method is to manually create the skeleton and name the bones from scratch. The second method is to steal the skeleton of a similar Vanilla Guns example mesh in the mod kit. This method is mainly useful when creating more complicated custom guns such as bolt actions, as it means you can copy and paste the example NMBP without needing to change that many values. In the top left, go to Add, select Armature, and scale it up. Then, in the bottom right window, go to Data, Viewport Display, and tick In Front. Move this bone somewhere behind the gun, then go into Edit mode and press Y on the axes in the top right corner to face the mesh flat on. Select Rotate, then rotate the bone sideways while holding Ctrl to get it at a perfect angle. Select the tip of the bone and press E, then drag out while holding Ctrl. Select and right-click the newly created bone, go to Parent, Clear, then select Disconnect Bone. Align this bone with your new charging handle. Return to the tip of the original bone and repeat. Align this new bone with the trigger and scale it down a bit, then put it at a slight angle opposite to the trigger. In Scene Collection, double-click the main bone and rename it to Body to match its vertex group. Then do the same for the bones you're using for the charging handle and trigger. Make sure these are spelled identical to their corresponding vertex groups, or the rig won't work. Before parenting, select your mesh and do Ctrl A, and select All Transforms. Then do the same for the armature. Select your mesh, then Shift select the armature. Right-click and hover over Parent, then select Empty Groups. To test if the rig was successful, select the armature and go to Pose mode. In the Pav examples folder, export the example mesh of a gun that's similar to the one that you are rigging. In this case, I'll be using the AK-47. Import the mesh into Blender and set its scale to 1, then select the gun's mesh and delete it. Select the skeleton, go to Data, Viewport Display, and tick In Front. The majority of these bones won't actually be needed for this particular rig. You can either delete unused bones or ignore them. It may be better for performance to delete them. For the sake of this tutorial, I will be ignoring them. Position the skeleton somewhere underneath the gun. Go to Edit mode and look for the bones called B_gun_slide and align this with your charging handle. Then find the bone called B_gun_trigger and align this with your trigger. Do this again for any of the other bones you'll be using. Return to Object mode and select your mesh. You will need to change the names of your vertex groups to match that of your bones. Before parenting, select your mesh and do Ctrl A, and select All Transforms. Then do the same for the armature. Select your mesh, Then Shift-select the armature. Right-click and hover over Parent, then select Empty Groups. To test if the rig was successful, select the armature and go to Pose mode. To perfectly center a bone to a point, go to Edit mode and select the area you want to center your bone at. Hold down Shift-S and select Cursor to Selected. Then return to Object mode and enter Edit mode again on your skeleton. Select the bone you wish to center, then do Shift-S again and choose Selected to Cursor. If any of your components are warping when you move their bone, it's likely you've got faces in multiple vertex groups. Each face on the mesh can only be in one vertex group. Just make sure no faces overlap in two vertex groups. In Scene Collection, right-click your rigged mesh and choose Select Hierarchy, then press File in the top right corner. Go to Export and choose FBX. You can export this anywhere, but I'll be exporting this to the Downloads folder. Under Include, tick Selected Objects, then untick Empty Camera, Lamp, and Other. Under Transform, change Forward to X Forward, and Up to Z Up. Most of the time you will need to set the scale to 0.01, otherwise your mesh will be 100 times too big when imported to Unreal Engine. This isn't always the case. In Geometry, set Smoothing to Faces. Finally, untick Add Leaf Bones under the Armature tab. To save needing to manually select these export options in future, you can press the plus icon at the top and save these as a preset. This concludes my tutorial for rigging custom guns. If you found this video helpful, a subscription would be appreciated.